I've always believed that every place carries memories, but in upstate New York, some memories refuse to fade away. From old castles to forgotten asylums, these places don't just sit abandoned, they whisper stories in the silence. Walking through them, you can feel the chill of something unseen, as if the past is still alive, watching. Some people call them haunted, others call them history. But one thing is certain, you can't stand in these places without feeling that strange weight in your chest. Today, let's uncover 5 of the most haunted places in upstate New York. If you enjoy exploring haunted places and forgotten stories, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. 1. Rolling Hills Asylum, East Bethany, New York. I still remember the first time I walked into Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany, New York. The building stood silent in front of me, its tall brick walls cracked with age, and its windows dark like empty eyes. From the outside, it looked like just another abandoned structure, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized it was far more than that. The air was heavy, almost damp, and every footstep echoed down the long, hollow corridors as if someone unseen was walking right behind me. This place was once a poorhouse, and later, it became an asylum. Thousands of people lived and died here, orphans, the sick, the insane, and those society had forgotten. As I moved through the hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that their presence still lingered. On one wall, the paint had peeled so badly that strange shapes formed in the cracks, and for a moment, I swore it looked like a face watching me. The most unsettling part came when I entered what they call the shadow hallway. People had warned me about it, saying that figures often appeared there, dark shapes moving faster than the eye could follow. At first, I laughed it off until I saw it myself. A tall shadow, nearly 7 feet in height, crossed the hallway ahead of me. It didn't move like a person. It glided, almost weightless, and then vanished into the darkness. My body froze. Every hair on my neck stood up, and I felt my hands trembling. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but deep down, later, in the old infirmary, I heard something that I will never forget. The room was silent, the air thick with dust, when a faint whisper broke through. It was a woman's voice, soft and drawn out, as if she was crying for help. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone, but the room was completely empty. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. Before I left, I stood at the entrance and looked back at the asylum one last time. The building didn't feel empty at all. It felt alive, holding on to all the pain, the suffering, and the memories of the people who never left. Walking away, I realized that some places don't just hold history, they hold the souls of the past, and Rolling Hills Asylum is one of them. Even now, whenever I think about that night, a chill runs down my spine. I can't explain everything I saw and heard, but I know one thing for certain. Rolling Hills Asylum is truly haunted. 2. Durand Eastman Park, Rochester, New York. I went to Durand Eastman Park on a cloudy afternoon, not really expecting anything more than a quiet walk by the lake. People in Rochester always talk about the white lady who haunts this place, but I had convinced myself it was just a local legend. Still, something about the way the trees stood tall and close together made me feel uneasy the moment I stepped onto the path. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the distant call of a crow. As I moved deeper into the park, the silence grew heavier, almost pressing against my chest. It didn't feel like I was alone, even though there wasn't a single person in sight. I stopped near an old stone wall, partly broken and covered with moss. That's when I remembered the story. A woman, dressed in white, still searches these grounds for her lost daughter who disappeared many years ago. Some say she suspects men harmed her child, and that's why her spirit appears angry to those who encounter her. Thinking about it while standing there gave me a strange chill. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, careful, almost dragging against the ground. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. The trail was empty, the air completely still. My heart began to pound, and I told myself it was just an animal. But the footsteps had sounded too human, too deliberate. A few minutes later, near the edge of the lake, I saw something that froze me in place. Across the water, through the thin mist, stood a figure in white. At first, I thought it was just someone in a dress walking, but she wasn't moving. She stood perfectly still, almost blending into the fog. I blinked, and in that split second, she was gone. There was no splash, no sound, nothing, just empty shoreline. I can't explain the wave of cold that rushed over me right after. My hands shook, and I could feel the goosebumps rising on my arms. It felt like someone was right beside me, watching, waiting. The trees swayed slightly in the breeze, and for a moment, I thought I heard a faint whisper carried across the lake. It was so soft, like a woman calling out a name. When I finally walked back toward the parking lot, every shadow along the trail felt alive. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the white figure behind me. By the time I reached my car, my throat was dry, and my body was tense, as if I had run a marathon. I don't know if what I saw was real or just my mind playing tricks, but I can't shake the feeling that the White Lady of Durand Eastman Park is more than just a story. And if she's still searching, I hope I never cross her path again. 3. The Sagamore Resort. I visited the Sagamore Resort on a chilly autumn evening when the trees around Lake George were painted in shades of red and gold. From a distance, the hotel looked grand and beautiful, sitting proudly by the water. But as I walked through its halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the place was heavier than it seemed. The lobby was warm and elegant, filled with soft lights and the sound of quiet conversations. Yet behind that comfort, I felt a strange tension, like the air carried whispers I couldn't hear. I had heard the stories before: the ghostly little boy who played on the golf course, the guests who never truly checked out. But it was only when I stayed there myself that I realized why people believe it. That night, after dinner, I took a walk near the golf course. The lake was calm, the moon shining over it, and the grass glittered with dew. I was the only one out there, or at least I thought I was. I heard the soft thud of a ball being struck, sharp and clear in the quiet night. My eyes darted toward the fairway, and that's when I saw him. A boy, no older than 10, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, was standing with a golf club in his hand. He looked so real that I almost called out to him. But before I could, he swung the club again, and the ball rolled across the grass, except there was no sound of it landing. I blinked, and just like that, he was gone. The club, the ball, the boy, nothing was there. The field was completely empty. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The air turned colder, and I could feel goosebumps prickling up my arms. Slowly, I backed away, every step heavier than the last, as if the night itself was pressing down on me. By the time I returned inside, my hands were shaking, and I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone what I had seen. Later, lying in my room, I kept hearing faint laughter in the hallway. It sounded like children running back and forth, giggling softly. But when I opened the door, the corridor was empty. The lights flickered once, and silence fell again. I shut the door quickly, my chest tight with fear. When morning came, the resort looked as peaceful and inviting as ever. Guests were smiling, the staff greeted me kindly, and the sun glittered across Lake George. But I knew what I had felt the night before was real. The Sagamore isn't just a luxury hotel, it's a place where the past lingers, where ghosts are part of the beauty, quietly reminding you that not all of its guests have ever truly left. 4. Hotel Utica, Utica, New York. When I first checked into Hotel Utica, I was more impressed than anything else. The place had an old-world charm, with high ceilings, chandeliers, and wide staircases that made me feel like I had stepped back in time. The staff was polite, and everything seemed normal, at least during the day. It wasn't until later that night that I began to understand why so many people say this hotel is haunted. My room was on the 7th floor. The hallway leading to it was long and quiet. The kind of silence that makes every step echo louder than it should. I unpacked, tried to settle in, and eventually turned off the lights to sleep. But around midnight, I woke up suddenly, as if someone had been standing right next to my bed. The room was dark, but I could clearly hear faint footsteps pacing back and forth near the door. Slow, steady, and heavy, like a person deep in thought. I sat up, my heart racing, and whispered. There was no answer, but the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, everything went silent again until I heard a loud knock on the inside of my closet door. That sound made my blood run cold. The closet was only a few feet away from me, and I hadn't put anything inside it. Gathering my courage, I switched on the lamp and slowly walked toward the closet. I pulled the door open with a shaky hand, but it was completely empty. No one was there. Still, the air inside felt icy, far colder than the rest of the room. I tried to calm myself and eventually crawled back into bed, but just as I started to drift off, I heard a woman's voice. Soft, distant, almost like a sigh. She said something I couldn't quite understand, but it was close enough to make my skin crawl. I sat up again, staring into the darkness, but there was no one. The strangest part came just before dawn. I must have dozed off for a little while, but I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting at the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under the weight, and I could feel the pressure near my feet. I was too scared to move, too terrified to look. I shut my eyes tight and whispered a prayer until the feeling finally disappeared. When morning came, the hotel looked perfectly normal again, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, staff greeting guests warmly, people chatting in the lobby. But deep inside, I knew what I had felt that night was real. Hotel Utica might look beautiful in the daylight, but once darkness falls, it's as if its past comes alive. And after spending just one night there, I'm certain some of its guests never checked out. 5. The Beardslee Castle, Little Falls, New York. I had always heard stories about Beardslee Castle, how it wasn't just a restaurant but also one of the most haunted places in upstate New York. One evening, out of pure curiosity, I decided to go there for dinner. Driving up the long road that led to the castle, the first thing that struck me was how isolated it felt. The stone walls stood tall and dark, lit only by a few warm lights at the entrance. It looked beautiful, but at the same time, there was something unsettling about it. Inside, the restaurant was cozy, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. The staff were friendly, and I almost forgot about the ghost stories. But the feeling of being watched never completely left me. The air was just a little too heavy, as if the building itself held secrets it wasn't willing to share easily. After dinner, I asked if I could take a quick look around the upstairs area. One of the servers smiled knowingly and told me, "Don't be surprised if you see something you can't explain." His words echoed in my mind as I climbed the staircase. The upper floor was dimly lit, with long hallways and old portraits hanging on the walls. As I walked, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My arms prickled with goosebumps, and I could see my breath in the air, even though the rest of the building had been warm. Then, from the end of the hallway, I heard soft footsteps, slow, steady, and moving toward me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. A shadow flickered against the wall, and I could clearly make out the figure of a man in old-fashioned clothes. He wasn't solid, more like a faded image, but he was there. He stopped only a few feet away from me before vanishing into thin air. I stood there in shock, gripping the railing beside me, unable to move for what felt like minutes. My mind kept telling me it wasn't real, but my body knew better. The chill, the footsteps, the shadow. It had all been too real. When I finally went back downstairs, the noise of the restaurant felt almost comforting. People were eating and laughing, as if nothing unusual had ever happened here. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. I wasn't sure they'd believe me. Driving away later that night, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure sitting in the back seat. Beardslee Castle might serve good food and look like a fairy tale from the outside, but I know now that it carries something far darker within its walls, and once you see it, you never forget it.